and welcome to this panel as part of the Mills Beyond Imagination Festival. My name is Addison Capper and I'm the Americas editor at Little Black Book. And today's panel is titled A Collaborative Approach to Color Grading. Our panelists today include 2 directors and 2 colorists. In each panel on your screen, we have 1 colorist and 1 director. Each pair has a close working relationship that we'll hopefully be learning a bit more about soon. In the light blue and navy shirts, we have Peter Oppersdorff and Michael J. Ferns. Peter is a multi-award winning colorist whose portfolio of work includes work for global brands like Just Eat, Adidas, Nike, Heineken, Schweppes, and Pepsi, and loads more. Michael's a director who's been making films since he was 12 and very casually won a Scottish BAFTA at the age of 16. Then in the other panel, in the double black, we have Phil Hambi and Tom Day. Phil is a colorist that has picked up awards at the British Arrows and D&AD, and I think last year served on the Cannes Lions Filmcraft jury. Tom is a director that, after graduating from film school with a British Arrow Gold Award in the student category, was welcomed into the world of advertising and signed with Outsider in 2018. So I think a good place to start is just to really kind of explore exactly what we're going to talk about today. So how would each of you describe the relationship between a director and a colorist? Who wants to tackle that first? I'm happy for you to jump in. Michael or Pete, we'll go with you.
I'll go first. For me, the relationship between a director and colorist is very unique. I think the colorist sits sort of in between the DOP and the director. We speak the language of light with the DP, but it's up to us to really explore the vision and realise the vision of the director. So for us, we're really their left hand. We help sort of push the vision of their narrative and story and commercial into the world that they're trying to sell to the audience.
Yeah, I think also for me, the relationship actually stretches kind of far back to the beginning of the process. So the colorist isn't there just to sort of try and make work what we've made before. The consideration color from the beginning of the process is super important. So the director relies on the cinematographer and the colorist relies on the director and the cinematographer, and the cinematographer, what they bring on screen and color and production design, all of that stuff is all part of a process that leads us towards this finishing point, I would say. Exactly. So I think perhaps too often there's this idea that you bring in the colorist at the end to kind of change what's come before, but really it's a kind of incremental building of the image that you're going to end up with, and color is obviously part of that process visually, so it needs to be considered kind of from beginning to end. So I would say the relationship is probably more comprehensive than that final moment in the suite. It's actually part of an ongoing discussion, or at least should be part of an ongoing discussion from the beginning.
That is definitely something we will cover in a minute in more depth. But Phil and Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I kind of echo what Pete mentioned about the left hand of the DP and the director. We're there to realise their vision and kind of know what aesthetic that they naturally navigate to, where they naturally navigate towards, and kind of keep it in mind when you've got to mediate the room between client, director, DP, and stuff like this. So it's just making sure that vision is realised, and it's quite I think, like everyone said, it's a pretty important one. It goes like way deeper than just sort of like going in and kind of working together. It's knowing kind of how they want to realise that vision and kind of best way to achieve it, really.
Yeah, I think just to quickly add to like the relationship between the colorist and director, for me as well, I think one of the things I'm looking for is how can we take this one step further? Perhaps something I haven't thought about, the DP hasn't thought about yet as well. And I feel like I do look to Phil in that sense as well when working together. Obviously, we've got that vision that we do have to keep in the back of my mind. But is there anything else that he's going to spot or notice or bring to it that perhaps haven't thought of? And maybe it does take it in a slightly different direction that you can sell in at the end, and it becomes better for it. So I'm looking for like that extra final layer that maybe we hadn't even thought about. That's what I'd love a colorist to bring as well.
Okay. And then going back to what Michael said earlier, like, color grading is part of the post-production process. But, and you know, we had a quick chat the other day, and something that came up quite a few times was the kind of most fruitful sessions really start in pre-production. So Michael, we'll put this to you first, just because you brought it up a minute ago, but you know, what are your thoughts on that, and why do you believe that to be true?
Well, I think ultimately you're working towards the same aesthetic place, and you know, and there is a way in which, you know, color is a kind of finishing process whereby you can bring your ideas to it. But I also think, you know, certainly for me, implementing that kind of thought process earlier on, because, you know, everything that works towards the visual, the cinematographer works towards the visual, the production designer works towards the visual, the director in terms of choices and what you choose to do, what you choose not to do, the performance, the wardrobe, like all of these things impact your final image. So the colorist's process in terms of how you narrow a palette on set through wardrobe, production design, lighting, and all of those things are all working towards that final image. So it seems natural to me that you're finding a kind of coherent picture by discussing all of the processes at once. That doesn't mean things can't develop and things can't sort of change as the process moves forward. You know, there definitely is an element in which, you know, we get into a suite and new decisions are made. But I wouldn't necessarily view the process as the place for new decisions to be made. It's like that just kind of happens incrementally when you're making stuff anyway. But I would say kind of, maybe this is sort of touching on the first question a bit more, but I think taste is like the biggest thing. Sharing a sense of taste and a sense of kind of intuition with regards to that is the important thing for me, because I think if you're working at odds with one another, you can talk technically, you can give references, you can do all these things, but what makes the relationship work is the fact that you share your kind of intuitive taste. Because if that's what you've been, and it's the same with the relationship between the director and the cinematographer, the taste has to be there, and that's obviously an incredibly subjective place to be, but that's where the fruitful relationship comes in, is you have similar taste, but you can also kind of pick at each other's bits. You don't be traveling in exactly the same direction or in completely divergent directions. It's like you want to be on the same path and also be able to kind of, you know, Peter to tell me when I give a note on a color grade, you want him to be able to say, no, that's a terrible idea, try this instead, or you know, and I like to be able to, because you know, the way we work at the moment remotely a lot of the time, and you know, with lots of client and agency feedback and stuff, you know, it's an extension of my taste that I need in the suite, because I can't be there to nitpick every bit, nor do I have the specific color expertise to nitpick every bit. So you have to, the delegation is important in that matter.
And then Tom, obviously all directors work in different ways, but with regards to the kind of the grading process starting as early as possible, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we sort of approach that different ways for different projects. If we're going to be completely frank, you know, depending on whether we even know if Phil's going to be grading it or not. Sometimes you know, you've got the politics of making sure the agency will bring them to the right people, etc. But when we do, and there's definitely been a few key projects where we have, you know, thought that far in advance of really setting the look for what we feel the project needs to feel like. I mean, we've gone to the extent of, you know, you've created LUTs for us that we then use on set to really set that world and that tone that we're after. So, you know, that's, you know, and then taking that LUT into the grade, you sort of use that as the base to then expand from there. So it sort of builds that world and that tone. So we've definitely done it on some projects, and then some projects, you know, we've come in at the last minute and, you know, we smash it out. So, you know, I think it can work both ways. Yeah, I don't think you always have the time to be able to, or the opportunity to be able to always like preset things as much as you like. But we definitely have done that on a few projects, and yeah, got examples of that, haven't we?
Do you want to? No, go on. Sorry.
I was going to say some of Tom's earlier work, we did loads of quite high octane, intense promo films for like boxing fights, and we didn't really have a lot of time, and it was to basically build the just to build upon what you guys had shot, and like make this stand out more than any other kind of promo that had been put out for any other sort of fight. And so it was, and we never really had a lot of time, so it was just build a look as quick as possible that we could put across everything, and that would kind of catch people's attentions, and they're kind of pretty
yeah. I must say though, just quickly, in the edit, when I'm in the edit, I have to put on a look, probably one that feels creative for us down the line, over everything before I can even edit with it. Now it's weird. I need to see roughly what I feel like it's going to look and feel like at the end. I think that's very important, even in the edit stage, just to, again, tonally, just to bring that whole world to life.
It's actually a good point, by the way. You just mentioned, the job that you did where you didn't have much time, and
jobs.
Yeah, and I imagine the reality is that most jobs are like that, right?
Yeah. Well,
so when you do have a job that, where you really do come in at the final stages and you're working against the clock, like, how beneficial is it that you kind of have these collaborative relationships and you're kind of already on the same page?
Yeah, I think that's super key. I think Phil and I, over the years, I feel fortunate enough to work with Phil, and I feel like he's really helped me set my look. Hopefully look at that image and go, sort of know that we've done that, and also the few DPs that have worked on those as well. And it sort of feels like we are all, like the guys were saying, on that sort of same page, on that same wavelength from the off. So when we do come in, even if we haven't had time to fully prepare it, we know what kind of world this is going to visually sit in. And, it takes probably like an hour or so to like really define that, what you'd call your like base look. So pick out a few key shots and key scenes, and then once we hit it, we know, and then we just work from there.
And Michael, is it Pete or Peter, by the way?
Peter.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm. Do you two have any thoughts on that? Like, when you really just don't have the time to kind of be there early, but just kind of being on the same wavelength, helping when you are kind of running out of time?
I think, to be perfectly honest, I think one of the reasons Michael and I's relationship has been so successful is we share a lot of the same tastes. And as we've worked more and more together, I know what Michael likes, and like he's already alluded to, he can lean on me in the suite if he's not there. So just with that experience of working together, I can already, if I've got an hour before a session and I'm in early or whatever, I can set a look that I know will be fairly close to with the right art direction, and I know Michael's tastes. This is assuming every project is perfect. Obviously there could be issues with the shoot on the day with regard to the weather and the lighting. It could be brief has kind of shifted with the client. So there are obviously mitigating factors, but generally speaking, I know what I know Michael would like, and that unless there's any surprises, I can always kind of hit the ground running every time.
But I also think it's like, it's not so much that, every project, as you say, it doesn't have the same amount of prep time for, bringing a colorist in early. Sometimes things are kind of, more rushed through. However, I would say there's rarely a time where there hasn't been a look established in earlier on, and that doesn't necessarily need to be in consultation with you. But the look is, where the grading comes in is a follow-on from the look you established through your production design choices, your lighting choices. So I think the main thing, I think you've got to ask the question maybe more broadly, like what's the purpose of a grade? And obviously that's a relatively subjective question, but for me, it's definitely to capitalize on what's been built so far. Like, I think there is a place in certain types of work. Rarely, I would say, in the type of work that we do, but there's a place sometimes, obviously, where you're looking to add something brand new and stylized that is, goes against what's shot before. You're taking kind of maybe more naturalistic footage and trying to, really push the boundaries in the grading process. But I would say, given that the majority of the work we do is more narrative focused,
very human.
I would say that the purpose of us is to create what would you say, like a kind of elevated version of reality. So rather than, going into, I think the promo world's probably different, maybe the sport world's different and stuff like that, where, creating an aesthetic that is, distinguished from, maybe more kind of narrative drama focused stuff. Whereas I would say what we're doing is capitalizing upon what's been shot and continuing in that direction. So it's sort of complementary a lot of the time.
And the stories, something simple as just something humorous, which often work is, would lend itself more to like warmer tones, something set in the morning. It can be just that simple. If something's meant to take place in the morning, you would lean your palette towards that way. So it can be something as simple as just the location and the time of day.
But also probably not trying your best not to try and fight against the footage. you know, you always hear on set, you know, this, you know, from recent experience, you're always hearing on set, you know, agencies and clients sort of justifying to one another how things are going to change in the grade. And obviously they conflate the grade with basically anything post-shoot. You know, and it's also conflated with kind of extensive 3D modeling and all sorts of stuff. So they'll say, oh, you know, you've shot on a stormy rainy day, don't worry, we'll make it look like summer in the grade. True, obviously, yeah, which, you know, that's talented as Peter is, that's not the place for it. You know, and it's true, because it's like, obviously what sells sun is not just a warm color grade, it's shadow, it's, you know, it's location, it's how everything interacts with each other in the scene. So I think the one thing we've done a lot before is just you embrace what you've got. You know, it's really capitalizing on what you've shot, not trying to, well, for me anyway, not trying to kind of force against something that isn't there in the base material.
And Tom, just because you do, obviously both of you shoot quite different stuff, I just kind of wondered your general thoughts on like the actual purpose of the grade, which is kind of what Michael explained there, just your interpretation of it.
Well, obviously building what, like, I'm fully with Michael in terms of what he's saying, in terms of like, it is building up on the look that was set, you know, in pre-production, in production, with art, with lighting, etc. And, you know, it's very much keeping it within how we were shooting it with that in mind. But I do, for me, and I think maybe this may be just the way some of the work has gone, is trying to still elevate that even more. And I think we do look to push a few boundaries where we can with some of the work, simply because of some of it, you know, some tonally, the subject matter, or whatever it might be. If you can't push it on a wrestling film or a boxing promo with a heavyweight boxer, then when are you ever going to push it? Is kind of my vibe with it. So, you know, there are times where I look to Phil and to the colouring process to where like, where can we take this, you know, even further beyond? Obviously, still keeping it within what we shot.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, every project we don't push. Like we did a
not everybody.
An Adidas Arsenal No More Red project with Idris and Ian Wright, and basically that was a really natural, raw, gritty look that wasn't kind of pushed. It was just respecting what had been captured, because the topic was such a kind of important topic that needed to be kind of approached, and we were respectful in that regard. Whereas, yeah, some of the boxing promos that Tom had shot in the early days were in a really dark, dingy gym, and they didn't have a lot of money for kind of like pimping out the set, and so it was literally, let's push this in the grade to kind of elevate this film. And then I think the other one, your boxing documentary, Nothing for Nothing, which was which was shot in Bermuda, was purely, the aim was to elevate the kind of what was captured to be reminiscent of what Bermuda was like. So it was really personal for Tom grading it, because basically I was actually having to rein myself in, because I was going this boxing kind of vibe, and Tom's like, no, that's not the colours of Bermuda. Like,
yeah, I want to keep that true to that environment. Yeah. So yeah, it's not always about it's not always about pushing it. I'm just talking about in the sort of sportsy world. But yeah, if there's something a little bit more, maybe
circumstance. Yeah, so regards to kind of what the job is. Like.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
And then I wanted to talk about taste for a minute, because I think it's something that's come up a couple of times already. And I imagine the grading process is like a largely subjective process, right? So is taste something that becomes quite clear, that you're kind of you both have a similar taste like quite quickly? And I guess we'll put this to Phil and Peter first, just as colorists, because you can kind of relate this to other directors that you work with as well. Does it kind of click quite quickly, and you just kind of realize, yeah, we have a similar taste, and this could work? Peter, we'll go with you first.
Yes, sometimes you kind of have to feel your way through it, and it takes a few jobs to kind of click. For example, the first job that Michael and I did, WWF, that's not like a lot of the projects we do now that I associate with the work that Michael and the best work that Michael and I do together. It was very much a technical exercise. It was set in a rainforest with a TV, with VFX screen inserts, emanating light. So my job was to really elevate that to look very, very polished and high end, and embed the VFX so it was interacting with its environment. So it was very much a technical exercise. So there wasn't the platform there to even, taste didn't come into it at that point. As our jobs evolved with the likes of Co-op, which we did together, which was really, really nice. Babel was another one, Erskine's. These are all jobs that have evolved and proven that our tastes are aligned. So yeah, for us it clicked, but often it doesn't. And communication's key, to be perfectly honest with you. Often you have to understand what people like to even know if you're on the same page. Communication's key to really, even just unpicking simple words like filmic, cinematic, they mean different things to different people, and everyone will relate to that. But sometimes it's showing someone what you think they mean, and they say yes or no, and only at that point do you know if you agree with them or not. So it is an evolution, but eventually when you find that consistency through repeat work, obviously, you know, the more work you do, the better. It's proof that you're on the same page. It takes time, but I'd say good communication is key to sharing taste and knowing that taste is what.
Okay. And Phil, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a yes. Like, I don't think we've been able to deliver the projects that we've worked together on so smoothly if our tastes weren't aligned. I mean, we're quite lucky that we've been able to do work together on high turnaround jobs, like with minimal time. So we've been forced to kind of like put our heads together and kind of work out the look, and that's where we've aligned our taste quite early on. And since then, we've been able to just kind of like run with it and really push it, and not really look back. But it's not always the case. Like with other directors, it can be a bit more challenging to kind of just, and again, the way Pete alluded to kind of understand like how they interpret certain kind of buzzwords essentially and stuff like that. So you've got to basically have a pretty in-depth kind of language of how people interpret different words and how they relate to film. But luckily with us, we've got a very similar taste, and it's just pretty smooth at the moment.
I think there's for me, it's like and going back to like the relationship I think there's just a trust between us that I was saying, if you're not in the same room, that also doesn't matter as well. Phil knows exactly the sort of, I'm looking at some of our images, and like each one for me, what Phil can bring to it is just that extra, layer of feeling from the image. And that's all we're there to do, is just trying to enhance that and that emotion on that tone. And I just trust Phil to be able to hit that right for the project. He knows what kind of project needs that particular thing to be pushed, or telling me, in fact, no, Tom, let's strip this back. We need to keep this, you know what I mean? Because you can get carried away, I think, in the grade as well. So I think there's a nice sort of like balance between, and I've had to keep Phil in check, he's had to keep me in check. So I think it's like a trust thing, that we respect what each other's saying, and then we'll always come out with something that we're both like, yes, that's it right there.
The thing that has, I think, helped develop mine and Michael's taste as well is the remote grading process, in the sense that it strips back the whole communication side of grading, whereby you have to be a lot more direct, because you're not in them, and it's a bit more, as I said, it's more direct. And whereas sometimes when you're sat in the suite, you can try things out, it's a little bit more test the water. With remote grading, I can say, how's this? How's that? Warmer, colder, darker, brighter. You kind of break down the kind of communication, and it's much easier to understand what people like and don't like. And I'd say one of the hidden benefits from where I'm sat with the remote grading process is it has made communication a lot more direct, which I think has helped us get to the sweet spot of what we like.
Well, I think the translation thing is interesting, because obviously you've got directors sitting in rooms who aren't colour graders, but who have let's say a vision. And so often the communication is a translation.
Yeah.
Picture. It's like, I'll talk in kind of, more abstract, descriptive terms, and then it's up to Peter to decipher that nonsense, let's say, and turn it into something concrete and actually action. Because I guess for me, what interests me in the colour grading process is because I'm a very detailed focused person. I really like kind of getting into the details of things. It's probably why I like doing 30-second long pieces, and spending 2 months thinking about them. Is this, and the grading process is like the epitome of that kind of real polishing, focused details thing. Because you get into total minutiae like that. The truth is, on a details level and on a kind of component level, no one will ever notice. But obviously, the point is that all of those little focus details turn into this final picture, which is which is received better than it would have been if you hadn't gone into those details. So I think it's the communication of turning those kind of abstract descriptions into something concrete in action. And given that I'm not a color grader and he's not a director, I think there's that. But then there's also, just to go back on the taste thing, try and edit this in earlier. But I think one of the things is obviously you try and bring your taste to each project you do. And I think that's why the intuitive sense is so important, because you've got different projects and not the same kind of lighting approach and grading approach isn't going to be right for every single project. But it's how you translate that taste into something that's kind of project appropriate. So, we've got examples of like the Earthing job and the Clock Job, which you mentioned before, are both very kind of narrative focused. Firstly, they kind of sit in that sort of slight narrative charity world. So you've got more license to say a little darker or a little moodier, be more kind of drama focused. And then, Babel, which we did, a few months ago, which was kind of sort of international TV and cinema campaign that has to work in a million different countries. And, it's like, well, that is a more commercial look. And the commercial look is a different thing. You want to bring that kind of sense of cinema to it and the sense of depth to it. But we do need to be slightly poppier and slightly brighter and slightly more kind of, well, it's more polished, it's less grainy, it's cleaner, it's that kind of thing. And it's how do you bring your taste and inform something that isn't naturally where you would go, but still kind of approximates something like your own idea.
Okay, and I was going to ask you about remote color grading a bit later, but because it's come up, we may as well talk about it now. And I guess when I wrote the question, I did not expect a very positive answer, to be honest. But Phil, but Peter, sorry, not Phil, you've already said that there's actually been some benefits to it. So Michael, do you want to speak a bit about the remote grading process and what your thoughts are on it?
Well, I mean, it feels to me like the thing that he likes about it might be what I just talked about, which is that kind of, shut up and speak in
yeah. Speak to me in real words and stop giving me
that kind of thing. And I think it maybe where it works is once you've established the in-person relationship, because that trust and shared taste thing is actually something that is put to the test in the remote grading session. You don't have time to work stuff out. So the first few sessions you did together, maybe the first 5 or 6 we did together, there really was a bit more kind of exploring. And then, but again, with the remote stuff, you get to apply. Now, it definitely has its positives. I'm personally prefer still being in the room, whether Peter wants me in the room or not. But I mean, I like the kind of exploring element, even though you do share the taste. I agree. There's certainly, the remote stuff works. We're doing it right now. The remote stuff works in circumstances where practically it's not possible to be together or not, not pragmatic to be together. But I think I do think there's something a little lost, if I'm honest, with not being in the room. I think as there is with not being in an office with people or not being in person with friends, like there's a back and forth that isn't quick and isn't intuitive, even though it's possible. It might not be preferable.
And Peter, I'm sure that you echo some of that too, right? It's not like you never want Michael in the room with you again.
And to be fair, the benefits I was speaking of were purely in the context of taste and understanding and communicating in the suite. But I also think there's an equal amount that's lost. A huge amount of our work is intuitive, and you sometimes don't know if something's right until you try something, And communication and being more direct helps things go quickly. It takes the fun out of it. Sometimes it's nice to try things and feel things and bounce things off one another, and that interactive element, and you only get that in person in the suite and feeding off the room. There's the whole part of what we do that you can't replicate.
Yeah, okay. And Phil and Tom, what are your thoughts on the remote grading process? Are there any positives to it, and just generally, how has it gone for you both?
I don't want to speak for you. I'll let you answer. But just personally, it can work, but I'd never choose it. I don't love it. I think just like stripping it right back, I find also coming into the grade is like a celebration process as well. The film's locked. right?
Yeah.
It's only going to get better from here. It's kind of the way I look at it. It's like a really positive moment. It's we're friends. It's time to have some fun as well. Like there's all of that to it as well. And I think, you know, and like the gents have just said there, like there is things on the day that come up that are intuitive, that you need to be in the room with each other. So that's sort of my feeling. I miss it if we're not. But saying that, you did create a whole documentary, like an hour-long documentary, and I wasn't there. This was like height of COVID. So, you know, and it looks amazing. So it can work, you know.
Yeah, and to be fair, there were the odd project. There was like, I'm trying to think now. We did a couple of projects pre-COVID that we just did approval with stills.
Okay.
So it was like a chat right at the front end. So it's kind of remote grading, but not using a remote view. It's just literally stills. But because we'd worked together so much, I kind of knew which way we were going, and so it was just, yes, this is like naughty, perfect. We're sort of like, these are the buzzwords that I know that I'm going in the right direction, basically. And then it's the odd sort of like adjustment just to kind of bring it in line with what Tom wants. But yeah, I as Tom said, it's kind of it's a moment to kind of hang out in the suite.
Yeah.
It's not, obviously it's not the same with every director, but like we work, both Pete and I, we work with directors around the world, and it's impossible to grade not remotely. And so we're really used to the remote world, and we're dealing with different people with speaking different languages. You need to kind of cut to the chase, get them to be able to cut to the chase easier. And so it's just it's not the best thing.
I think like a good way to kind of start rounding up is to just chat a bit more about, like, you know, you've all mentioned trust loads of times, communication, and something like when we had a chat the other day, you mentioned like there's an important part of, you know, sometimes one of you has to say no, like this is a bad idea, or you're going too far with this. Like feeling comfortable to say to someone, this is actually a bad idea. Like, I think you're going the wrong way with this, and not just kind of saying yes all of the time.
Yeah.
Like, it's important to have that communication.
Yeah, we've definitely had that for sure. Like, it's not always going to be like 100% plain sailing. There's always like a particular shot for whatever reason that comes up where you're pushing it one way and I'm like, nah, it should be that way. But I think it's important to sort of, and I'm sure the same vice versa, when I'm like, oh, can we go into, you know, his or her face there and like lift something there or something like that, a little detail that you'd maybe say, no, we don't need to do that. And I'm saying we do. And I think it's important to say no to each other, but also to listen to each other and work out why the other person is trying to say that. And I do try and look, this is Phil's job. He does this every day with amazing directors all over the world. So I think it would be foolish of me to not sit back and listen and actually do take that advice sometimes if he's saying no to me, because, you know, I really trust his expertise, his skills, and even, you know, his vision for the film as well as mine. So, you know, it's all a collaborative process. And like you said, I think it is important to be able to draw each other in, say no, whatever that might be, as well as, you know, celebrate the whole process together as well.
Yeah, Michael and Peter, do you kind of agree with the whole celebratory thing there, that it does feel like a bit of a celebration when you get to that stage?
I hadn't actually thought about it as a celebration, although I guess that, you know, what you touched on there in terms of the kind of social aspect to it is obviously a very appealing part of it. You know, I mean, trying to think of a collaborative process isn't best done in person with other people. But I think what I was going to get to there was we have an industry that is in theory built on sort of expertise, you know, and you know, when we're in a room together and we have different sets of expertise, there's no point in me pretending that I'm a colorist, and there's no point in Peter pretending he's a director, although we understand each other in those moments, you know. So I think the tension's necessary. Like, I don't view that disagreement as a negative thing. I think what pushes you up is that pushing against each other, you know. And I do want, you know, you don't want yes people in the room. I mean, I've definitely worked with people who are just there to tell you, oh, your decisions are correct, and they will execute them. But the truth is, the decisions aren't always correct. You know, as subjective as possible as it be to be incorrect in a subjective thing like this. But it's like, you know, you want to suggest something, try it out, and if it doesn't work and I don't see it, if I'm ignorant to the fact that that isn't working, I need told. But then, you know, we also then, you know, so those things where we push against each other are the things that make things better, because, you know, sometimes I will win and sometimes he will win. But as long as the answer is correct, then we both win.
Yeah.
You know, it's also that fact that we have taken the time in the suite, you know, which we talked about a bit before, which is taking time to spend a few hours on something and then walk away from it. Because I know for a fact that I lose sight of, well, I definitely lose the kind of objectivity I, you know, began with once you've been staring at it. And, you know, I think Tom talked about that earlier. It's like you can go too far. And why you're tempted to go too far is because, you know, you've got another 3 hours left, and it's like, well, why not do more? Well, maybe the good thing is to recognize when you've done enough.
Yeah, I don't really like pushing back. I mean, first and foremost, I see my role as kind of just making Michael and the agency happy, you know, all the directors and the DP happy. So if someone requests something, I will always try. That's kind of what I say.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it for this reason or this reason, but let me show you why it's not going to work. I don't ever like to say no. Best example is to prove that something doesn't work. And if you do this, it might look nice here, but you can't repeat it here for these reasons, yada, yada, yada. So, yeah, I'll never say no or push back, but I'll try and prove if I have an opinion on something. And I only draw the line on anything that's technically poor. Not that that's happened with us, but the only time I'll kind of put my foot down and go, I'm not doing that, is if something goes against my creative principles, in the sense of like it's technically unsound to lift something that high or make something that dark, you know. But it would have to be pretty far for me to kind of say I'm not doing that, you know.
But you're also right in the sense that the best way to get, you know, to show you that the right answer is there is to test it out. And sometimes that is testing something that your intuition tells you is probably not right.
You can get the odd job. You push something so far to prove that it's not working, they go, we love it. We love it. You know?
You're like, oh no.
The service after all, so we have to.
I want that. Give us that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, we're providing a service after all, so we've got to basically like give what the client wants. It's just with Tom and I, we are like friends, and so we basically worked together for so long that I don't think you mind if I kind of give my honest opinion about what you do. Yeah, so it's again, it's like circumstantial with like most directors. It's yes, of course we can do this. We can have a look at this, look down this avenue, and if it kind of works, that's great. If not, let's see if there's another way we can kind of make you happy. But when you're in, and I do see it as being like invested, like creatively and kind of emotionally sounds a bit too strong, but like, invested in these pieces, like you kind of you feel that creative vision, and like we invest in each other and in sort of like the work and stuff. So you kind of want to make sure that everyone is kind of absolutely like as happy as they can be. So it's just it's why it's quite a nice, I think quite rare sort of like situation that obviously that Pete and Mike have and Tom and I have, where we can kind of we have that frank kind of an openness that we can communicate on that same level.
And then as a final question, sorry.
I was just going to say one more thing, just to voice a little attention to that, because I think I probably, you know, again, this is, I understand obviously with, you know, Colour as a business and dealing with clients and stuff, and we talk about it as a service. For me, the relationship between the Colorist and the DP isn't one of a server and a servee, as it were. It's like I want a collaborator in it. Yeah. And you want someone that's as much as your DP isn't there to service your vision. I certainly wouldn't view the relationship as that. It's there to be another collaborator in the process. Now, obviously, the director is there to kind of captain the ship, as it were. But ultimately, you know, the captain doesn't understand every single piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of metaphors in one there, but I think that the key thing is that you're looking for someone who's bringing their own creative vision to it. And the reason we share taste is because Peter actually has a taste to share. It's not just that he technically enacts my taste. He has a taste that he has and a taste that I have, and they cohere in a bunch of ways, and they might not be the same in other ways. And those tensions where they're not the same is the thing that I think results in good work, because someone's got to win that battle, and maybe the right voice wins in theory.
Okay. And then as a final question, because we are running out of time. Like obvious, and we've definitely touched upon a little bit of this just then, but we've obviously approached most of this conversation with regards to the relationships that you already have. But obviously as colorists, you'll be working with new directors fairly often. And as directors, I guess you can't always work with the same colorist. So how do you make it as like as a collaboration, as fruitful as possible with someone that you're working with for the first time?
I've been very fortunate to have worked with Phil for the majority of my work, but there definitely has been instances with other projects, where we're working with different colorists. And I think what I'm looking for is, well, everything we've talked about is like trying to build that relationship. So we're both working on the same page towards that same vision and feeling out of the images. And I think I'd like the colorist to have a good sense, ideally, before I walk into the room of where we're going with this. Obviously, that would have been communicated, and even by looking at some of my previous work, if it still feels within that world, they might have a good idea. And I mean, if we can be open, we've been a bit sneaky before, where Phil's where I've had to go with another colorist because it was an agency deal, but Phil's done some like grade sets for me. I've sent him a few of the rushes, so I've gone in and say, can we make it look like this? And it's an image that Phil has done for us. Not every time, but there's sort of certain things you just want to make sure you can still keep it within the vision that I always had in mind, and you just want to make sure someone else can bring that to life. But I would say, from working with Phil and everything we just talked about, that trust and communication, I've definitely now got the confidence to go and speak to a new colorist for the first time and say, I would, this is where I'd love to go with it, and if they're taking it somewhere else, I can pull them in, and I feel like technically I know what I need to talk about, how to put it in. Do you know what I mean? Just from picking up things that Phil's done, and even little techniques that he does with little details, which can make all the difference. Like Michael said, once they all add up at the end, I feel really confident from our experience to be able to take that and work with someone new.
Okay, Michael, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's probably a little imbalanced in the sense that Peter and Philip probably work with more directors, more variety of directors than we work variety of colors, because obviously our role in the project takes longer, so we do less projects than the colorists do. So I would say, I mean, we really have worked together quite consistently recently. I think in terms of, it probably harks back to, we're working with a new colorist, probably harks back to what we were talking about in terms of where the trust lies, because obviously it's an old adage that trust is earned. And that's true. So when you're with a new colorist, I guess from my perspective, if I want it to go the way I want it to go, then I probably just need to have a slightly louder voice, and you're working it out with the colorist there. But truthfully, if you haven't built the trust relationship with this new person, it is pretty difficult and perhaps even foolish to just kind of give that trust away for nothing. Because ultimately, the reason I trust Peter is because we have delivered on what we want to do over time. And if that relationship hasn't built with a new person, then you probably just need to be more prescriptive. I feel like I need to be more prescriptive if I want the result to be, as planned.
I'm going to flip this. This is the final question. I'm going to flip this question slightly for Phil and Peter in a way that might be kind of not easier to answer, but might kind of lead to something a bit better. But if you are working if any directors are watching this, if you are working with a new director, obviously you, as you said, you are providing the service, but is there something that you kind of like from working with a new director that kind of makes the process better for both of you?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't do my job unless I understand what the director wants, and that vision has to be clear. So for me to even interpret their vision correctly, they have to have a clear vision. So that the obvious one is a treatment. So I would read that very thoroughly. And if it's a good treatment, then it should be reasonably clear what world they're trying to sell on screen. Second, if they provide any kind of literal photographic references, whether it's previous work they've done and they have a consistent style, or this particular project, they might want to emulate the work of a photographer, or anything that gives me more information to know which direction they want to go in a grade, allows me to hit the ground running and know what they want. So I guess just having a clear vision and a clear idea about a story, commercial, music video is key. And on top of that, when you're in the session, communicate clearly. But for me personally, I mean, the key to any successful session is to, first and foremost, you've got to get on a personal level. So I try and make sure everyone's as relaxed, whether that's playing some nice music, good tunes, dim lighting helps, you know.
Yes.
Personally a little bit, get down those barriers, and then the communication flows, and then you can kind of really get into the work. But first and foremost, I think it's important to have a very thorough kind of grade set, even if that beginning part of my session takes a bit longer than it normally would. I think it's key to establish that very early on, and then from then on, once they're happy, everything else should fall into place.
Okay. And then Phil, is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of, you know, what you would like to see from a director that you're working with for the first time?
No, treatment is really helpful, and great stills really helpful kind of like starting point. Having a little bit of time before anyone arrives, just to kind of like set a couple of looks, so there's something to talk about straight off the bat instead of starting off fresh. And yeah, as Pete said, music is always a nice kind of like, depending on taste, it might be a really helpful kind of key. Also, a good lunch.
Okay.
A bit of a good lunch is always a good kind of like topic of conversation. Just anything that helps break that ice initially is a really good kind of help in the suite. But yeah, it's just
yeah, because it's quite an intimate experience, isn't it? Yeah. If you're walking into a room and you're there for the whole day with someone you've never met before, and sometimes it can just be you two, and like the agency turns up later, you really need to feel like by the time the agency turns up that you two are a team. I think that, and like really aligned. I think that's really important as well. So yeah, it must be tricky for you having to do that quite often. Yeah, but obviously very good at it.
Word for word took the words out of my mouth with it being quite an intimate experience. Like I was literally about to sign off. I think yeah.
Just ask one question. You can obviously cut this out.
For it.
Just for Tom, just in terms of, because we didn't discuss kind of, so one thing that was brought up there was reference images for a grade. I've always found that kind of tricky thing to take another piece of work that might be different in its context, its location, its character, and try and expect a colorist to kind of abstract out the principle of that color approach, even though it's lit differently and the characters are different and the set is different, and use like, how useful a tool do you all find that? Because for me, I see limited use in that.
References are very much a pinch of salt. That I find if you get given a reference and you match it literally, they come back and go, oh, that's too much or not enough. So they're very much a pinch of salt. It could just be the tone. It could just be a combination of colours. It could be the texture. Sometimes you'll get a mood board and they're wildly different. So there's definitely an element of like interpretation. But then again, that's just for me to try and find a consistent, unpick, find a thread. You know?
Yeah, I agree. It's similar sort of just finding an ounce of kind of like detail in a still can be really helpful. Like we did a short film where we were drifting for a little while, and then we found I kind of suggested a still from photographer Mike Brody, and I would recommend just have a look at his work. And we found this look, and I think after we'd found this look, we'd set it, and we kind of like were really like excited about it. I think we actually, in a 6-minute film, we managed to, this was on the 29th of December, bearing in mind, so we both wanted to get out of there. Not, but in that regard, but just wanted to get home. But yeah, I think 6 minutes, we did it in 4 hours, and it was, across the whole piece, it was so strong. And because we had this reference, we were able to kind of build this look as simply as possible, and it was into like, run it across everything and tweak.
Yeah, something to hold ourselves to, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which I think was useful. But I think that's probably the first time we've done that.
Proper reference, yeah.
You know, to answer your question, Michael. Yeah, we haven't. You know, like there's obviously references in the treatment that you've done previously. I know Phil's seen that. I don't like to bring that into the room necessarily. I think, you know, if there's something new and fresh that we've seen, then yeah, maybe 1 or 2 stills, but I don't want to overload Phil with that at all.
Okay, I think we're going to stop there purely for time's sake. You can hash this out in real life right now if you want to, but thank you very much for doing that. I hope it was okay for you all.
It was all right, actually. I wasn't sure to explain.
Been a long day.
Thank you, Michael and Peter as well. It's been really interesting. I feel like I've learned from you guys. So
likewise, mate.
Good listening. Thank you.